want to say good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to today's webinar presentation presented by Gusmer Enterprises and Christian Hansen. My name is Chris Nevash. I am the product manager for the Christian Hansen product line. And I thank you today for your time and your business. And now I'm going to roll this over to David Spector and Duncan Ham for the presentation. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Chris. Good afternoon. I'm David Spector, Technical Account Manager for North America with Christian Hansen. I would like to thank our distributor Gusmer for hosting us, but most of all, I want to thank you for joining us today. I know this is a very busy time of the year for you, so we want to deliver this presentation in a concise and clear manner. You're facing many challenges this year, and our hope is to provide you with valuable data and decision-making tools. That is why I will be introducing our top enologists from Australia. They too have dealt with the devastating effects of wildfires. To help the industry, we began exploring an area where minimal scientific research has been performed: malolactic fermentation and its effects on smoke-tainted wine. With that, please welcome my colleague, Duncan Ham.
Good afternoon, everybody. And David, first of all, thank you very much for that very kind introduction. And also thank you very much to Chris and the Gusmer team for organising today's session. And as both of them have already alluded to, we really do hope it is useful and constructive at this time. So let us begin. First of all, if we just take a little bit as way of an introduction, a look at the science behind smoke taint. We know that ripening grapes are susceptible to taint compounds from taint that arises from phenolic compounds present in atmospheric smoke that arises from nearby fires. But while vines and fruit are sensitive right throughout the ripening period, by far the most critical time where fruit is most sensitive is the period 7 days post-veraison up until harvest. Now, when taint compounds are absorbed into grapes, they're then found and once picked in two different forms. Now on the left here, we have the free form, and we've got an example, which is guaiacol. As these free phenols, the compounds are very volatile and give significant smoke aroma. And they generally have very, very low aroma thresholds as well. The other form is the bound form. And we have an example here, which is guaiacol retinoside. And this is where the taint compounds are bound to sugar molecules. In this case, it's a disaccharide. Now, these glycosides, as we call them, are non-volatile, so we do not smell them. However, we do taste them, and they contribute to an ashy taste as the individual phenols are then released once our saliva reacts with these compounds. Now, what's really interesting is if you harvest a grape which has been affected by smoke taint, by far the vast majority of taint compounds will be in the bound form. Throughout vinification, however, there is a shift in that equilibrium towards the free form, and effectively the smoke aroma increases. With this particular, using this particular this reaction, we wanted to frame it for what we wanted to investigate today, and that is the effect of malolactic fermentation on smoke taint. As David alluded to, there's actually minimal scientific data on how malo does affect tainted wines. The most useful piece of information is from a researcher called David Kelly from Western Australia, from a paper he published in 2014. And he found that Viniflora CH16, which is one of our Christian Hansen malo strains, did not actually result in an increase in the free phenol concentrations over bound during malo. So that's really positive, but it's only on one strain and it's only one study. We also see anecdotal recommendations, and I've referenced some here on the screen from South Africa, to first of all, to avoid spontaneous malo, and secondly, to avoid using strains which exhibit a high degree of glycosidic activity. Now that's a fine statement to make. However, culture suppliers if they've even measured glycosidic activity, and not really in the habit of publishing that information. So while that's a good statement, it's not really addressable to a choice of addressing malo in a tainted wine. So with all this in mind, and with the reaction between free and bound, and an overwhelming, I guess, a tradition of trying to maintain to minimize the amount of free compounds, we then we set out to determine which is our best malolactic strain for running malo in a tainted wine. Now, we did this partly because in Australia in the 2020 vintage, we had quite a few regions which were really badly affected by smoke taint. So the question was asked of us, which is the best strain to use on our affected wine? And we couldn't really answer that. Other than this paper with CH16, we couldn't really give a good answer. So we wanted to address that and actually be able to say conclusively, this strain is good, another strain is bad, this is the one to use. One further comment, we went into this knowing that all of the different strains we sell are unique and have different metabolism. Our expectation going into this was therefore that some strains would be really good and other ones would be less good and would actually result in a lot of free compounds. So from there, we put together an experimental design. We have an application in microbiology lab in Christian Hansen, Melbourne. And what we plan to do is take some tainted wine, put those wines through malo with six different range malo cultures. We'd do that at 250 milliliter scale in duplicate. We also have a laboratory located not too far from us. It's one of the two laboratories in Australia that offers taint phenol analysis by GCMS, and they can give you both bound and free concentrations. And we decided we would sample the wines before and after MLF with the 6 different strains we've got on the screen here. So we have Enos 2.0, CH11, CH16, Enos, citrate negative, and CH35. And as for the 7 phenol compounds we were screening for, they were guaiacol, 4-methyl guaiacol, syringol, 4-methyl syringol, and the 3 forms of cresol, both bound and free. So we have our experimental design. Our next challenge is to actually find some wines that we can study. So we reached out to our network in Australia, and we actually had a really encouraging feedback from customers who had examples of wines that were post-primary fermentation, but pre-malo that we could study. And the 3 wines that we took forward were 3 quite different styles with 3 different levels of taint. Wine number 1 was a Pinot Noir Rosé from a region called the King Valley, which is located in the northeastern corner of the state of Victoria, where we're based, and it's one of the most severely hit regions by smoke taint. And the wine we had was actually an awesome wine to do a malo study on because it had a really lovely pH, 3.5, but also had a really high level of malic acid, so there's plenty of substrate for the bacteria to feed on. We didn't do much to this wine. It was very clean, had next to no micro count, so we simply added 10 parts sulfur, and we also added a product called Bactivate, which is a Christian Hansen, it's a Christian Hansen malolactic nutrient. We'd actually measured the nitrogen on all 3 wines, and they were quite low. So to ensure good malo, we did put a malo nutrient in. Wine number 2 was from the same region, King Valley again. This time it was a Tempranillo. This wine had actually just been inoculated about 2 days before I spoke to the winemaker. So we had to deal with the population of CH16 that was there. And to do this, we actually heat treated the wine in a water bath in 2-liter bottles at 86 degrees Fahrenheit for 3 days. And that was effective because we plated the wines out before and after, and sure enough, we went from a count of 10 to the 6 to basically nil on Enococcus. Again, we added a bit of sulfur and Bactivate. Now, the last wine from a region called Gundagai, which is in the New South Wales Hill Country, another region that was really badly affected, was Cabernet Sauvignon. This one had a pretty low level of malic, and obviously we wanted to ensure a nice, healthy reliable malo. So we actually boosted it by adding a further gram of L malic. We actually used laboratory grade L malic for that. And this wine did have a lot of background flora. So again, we heat treated this like we had the Tempranillo. We also added the sulfur in the Bactivate. So we had 3 really good candidate wines to take forward. Before we show you the malo results, I just wanted to present what the levels of taint compounds were in the wines before we treated them. And if we start off with the graph on the right-hand side, the blue line is the sum of all of the free concentration, and the orange line is the total of the bound compounds. So you can see, except for the first one where it's roughly 50-50, there's a lot more bound compared to free, which is kind of what we would expect in most wines with tainted fruit. On the left-hand side, we've just represented the concentrations of the free compounds. And what I've done is actually I've overlaid the aroma thresholds in water for each of those compounds. And what's really interesting is for most of the compounds, the concentration's well below the aroma threshold. Yet these are overtly smoky wines. So it really does demonstrate that there's a synergistic effect between the different phenols, that you can't really look at them in isolation. And I think that's also, if we look at the research into smoke taint, 5 or 10 years ago, people were just studying guaiacol and syringol, and that was pretty much it. Now we see people studying all 7 compounds, which is giving a far better picture, if you like. I'm just going to move on now to how the malos performed, and the good news is all the malos went through really efficiently. They took between 2 and 6 weeks, depending on the culture and the wine, and we took them all fairly low, rather than just stopping them at 0.2 grams per litre malic or lower. We actually took them, we tried to get them in a fairly narrow band, and so all the wines were actually between 0.02 and 0.07 grams per litre. The other nice thing to see is we know that all of our strains are different strains and they have different kinetics, and actually we can see their relative speed is roughly the same on each of the wines, with CH35 and citrate negative tending to take the longest, and CH11 by far being our fastest. So this is where we've got up to. Now we need to look at some results. So what we have here is some fairly raw data. Each of these 3 graphs represents the concentrations of each of the 7 free compounds with each of the different cultures. Now, on an initial snapshot, it generally doesn't look like there's much difference between the pre-malo sample, the blank, which is a non-inoculated control, if you like, that we also had ran next to them, and the 6 different cultures. But because this is quite a messy way of looking at it, we thought it would be much more useful to actually take the sum of all of the free compounds and look at them that way. And when we do this, what's really interesting is we don't see any difference. We, in fact, between pre-malo and complete malo with each culture, once we take the method uncertainty into account, there's absolutely no significant difference. There's no increase in the free phenols. And this is a really good thing. It's not at all what we were expecting. We were expecting that malo would, certainly with some strains, would increase the level of free phenols, but we can also take an awful lot of comfort to know that actually the 6 strains that we sell in the US do not affect, do not shift that equilibrium in themselves. So this is my concluding slide. Across the board, what we saw is no increase in any of the 7 free taint phenols in any of the wines put through ml with any of the 6 cultures. This is really good because it also lines up really nicely with the work from David Kelly, where he studied CH16, or his group studied CH16. And we would also say that any of our 6 cultures could be used on an affected wine in the confidence to know that the malo itself will not increase the free taint concentrations. So that's really useful. I would like to add 3 further points, however. We're incredibly mindful that smoke taint is both a very serious and soul-destroying issue. Malo, in the grand scheme of things, is a very, very long way down the list of other issues to deal with. With that said, however, where we feel this could be relevant is for any wines that might be borderline, where there's very low levels of taint, where they've been taken through, they've been crushed, they've been fermented, and they're ready for Malo. We now have the answer as to whether our strains will make the problem worse, which is something really useful. The third point I'd also want to make is we see this as a potentially really, really good tool to be used in combination with other tools to deal with smoke taint. So with maybe light pressing, short skin contact, fining with activated carbon, all of those things have an impact and a small incremental gain. And we could see that this also can fit in with that really, really nicely. So that takes me to my acknowledgements. I'd like to thank my colleague Lorenzo Paya. Lorenzo is one of the smartest guys in Christian Hansen. He is one of our application scientists in Denmark, and we collaborated together on putting this trial, the trial plan together. I'd also like to acknowledge the wineries. The wineries themselves have asked to remain anonymous, and we absolutely respect that. But we have a distributor in the eastern states of Australia called E. Muir and Sons, and they have been extremely helpful in facilitating and tracking down the wines. That brings me to the end. So I think we want to open the floor up to some questions.
All right, thank you, Duncan. We have quite a few participants today. This is obviously a topic that many people are taking seriously and want to learn more about. Just a few weeks ago, UC Davis held office hours and there were over 200 attendees. So we have a question, and if anyone else has a question, please write it in the Q&A section. So the first question, Duncan, is do we know what is the minimum perimeter of impact to the grapes for smoke taint? Meaning if the fire is 5 miles away and there's substantial smoke in that vicinity, will the grapes be affected?
That's a really good question. And I think it's a really good question on a number of fronts, because the different variables at play are the type of fuel. So what sort of wood is burning, how old the smoke is, and how long it's been lingering for. It's a really hard one to answer. That would be the first facet. The second one would be what the concentrations of phenols that are actually absorbed by the grapes would be. And that's really useful, but there's a really important third aspect, and that is what's actually the sensory impact. And we've been sharing this information with our customer base in Australia, and it's really useful information. And wineries in Australia do use this chemistry in depth, but it's best partnered with sensory evaluation, usually through an early peak microvinification. And that's the best way. And it's really interesting. I listened to one of the office hours about 2 weeks ago with Anita Oberholster, and she made exactly that point. And that's exactly the feedback that we're getting from our customer base in Australia as well. So to answer that question, I don't think there's a cut and dry answer. I think it depends, and you just need to test and see.
And Duncan, what was the hypothesis when you set off on this experiment? Did you expect to see differences between the different strains of Enococcus eni in the Viniflora range?
Absolutely, because we know that glycosidic activity is part of the makeup of Enococcus, if you like. Enococcus does have glycosidic enzymes. Normally we see them as a good thing because they lend themselves to maybe fruitier wines, and that's something that can be manipulated. So we naturally assumed, and actually if you read some of the literature reviews as well, it talks about Enococcus. It hypothesizes that Enococcus would be problematic. And so we generally thought, yep, it's going to be a case of finding the least bad strain rather than what we saw, which was actually no effect. So our expectation was that we wanted to find the one strain which we could sell for smoke taint, which is we've got 6 strains we can sell for smoke taint. So it's nice, but it's a little bit anticlimactic as well. Not what we were expecting.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Duncan. That's all the questions that we have today.
Okay.
But I wanted to let all of the attendees know, if you have any questions, please reach out to your Gusmer sales rep. They'll be happy to answer any questions that you may have, and they will be a direct line to us at Christian Hansen.
Thank
And
you,
thank you for
everybody.
joining.
Thank you, Duncan and David.
Thanks, Chris. You're welcome, and I really hope it added value.
Have a wonderful day, everybody.
Have
Thanks.
a good day, everyone. Goodbye.
Bye.